I'm Jessica, 26, and I never expected to lose control of my own apartment with a single knock at the door. There stood my sister Amber, 29, surrounded by an alarming amount of luggage, her smug smile sending chills down my spine. Surprise! I'm moving in, she announced, pushing past me before I could process what was happening. My stomach dropped as I frantically called my mom, only to hear the words that made my blood run cold. Let her stay, Jessica. Family helps family. 2 years of independence vanished in an instant, and I suddenly felt like a prisoner in the home I worked so hard to make my own. Before I begin my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had a family member take advantage of your kindness. I should probably back up and explain how I ended up in this situation. After graduating with my marketing degree 3 years ago, I landed an entry-level position at Horizon Advertising. The pay wasn't amazing at first, but I was determined to make it on my own. I budgeted carefully, brought lunch from home, and skipped expensive nights out that my coworkers frequently enjoyed. My hard work started paying off when I received my first promotion after just 18 months. Around that time, my parents mentioned they had purchased another rental property, a 2-bedroom apartment in Westview Heights, a safe neighborhood with reasonable commuting distance to my office. They offered to rent it to me at market rate, with a proper lease agreement. It wasn't a handout, I would pay the full amount like any other tenant, but I wouldn't have to deal with a property management company, and they wouldn't have to worry about finding a reliable tenant. It was a business arrangement that happened to benefit both parties. I signed a 2-year lease and moved in immediately. The apartment wasn't fancy, but it had good bones. Hardwood floors, decent natural light, and a small balcony where I could enjoy my morning coffee. I spent weekends painting the walls, hanging artwork, and carefully selecting furniture that expressed my personality. My home office in the 2nd bedroom became my sanctuary, where I often worked late into the evening on freelance projects to build my portfolio and earn extra income. Every corner of that apartment represented my independence and the adult life I was building for myself. My relationship with my family has always been complicated. My parents, David and Laura Thompson, own several properties around the city as part of their retirement investment strategy. They're not wealthy by any means. Dad worked as an accountant and Mom as a high school teacher before they retired last year. They saved diligently and made smart investments, including in real estate. Then there's my older sister, Amber. Growing up, Amber was the golden child. Charismatic, popular, and seemingly destined for success. But somewhere along the way, she never quite launched into adulthood. Since college, she's had 7 different jobs, never staying longer than 8 months at any of them. There was always a dramatic story about why each position ended: a terrible boss, toxic coworkers, or a company that just didn't appreciate her talents. In between jobs, Amber would inevitably run out of money. And just as inevitably, our parents would step in to help. They paid her rent when she was short. They covered her car payment when she decided a shopping spree was more important. They even paid off her credit card debt twice, with Amber promising each time she had learned her lesson. I, on the other hand, never asked for financial help after college. I took out student loans and was steadily paying them down. I lived within my means and built an emergency fund. But despite my responsibility, it always seemed like Amber received more attention and support from our parents. When I achieved something, like my recent promotion to junior account manager, it was acknowledged briefly, then conversation would quickly turn to whatever crisis Amber was navigating. Growing up, Amber had a habit of taking my things without asking: clothes, makeup, electronics. When I complained, my parents would say, "Don't be selfish, Jessica. Sharing is caring." But it never felt like sharing when I had no choice in the matter. This pattern continued into adulthood, with Amber borrowing money she never repaid or borrowing my car and returning it with an empty gas tank. In the weeks before Amber showed up at my door, several significant events occurred that I later realized were connected. First, Amber called me crying about losing her job at a boutique downtown. According to her, her manager had targeted her for being late a few times, even though everyone else was late too. I later learned from a former coworker of hers that Amber had been chronically late for months and had received multiple warnings. Second, my dad underwent knee replacement surgery, which came with substantial out-of-pocket costs even with insurance. My parents mentioned being a little tight financially for a few months while they adjusted to these unexpected expenses. And finally, I received a significant promotion at work, which came with a 15% salary increase. I had mentioned this news to my family during our monthly Sunday dinner, proudly explaining how I had impressed the senior partners with my campaign ideas for a major client. In retrospect, I should have seen the storm brewing. Amber had been unusually interested in my apartment during her last visit, asking detailed questions about my lease and making comments about how spacious it was for one person. But I was too caught up in my own success to notice the warning signs. I had no idea that my hard-earned stability was about to be severely tested by the chaos that is my sister. The evening Amber arrived at my doorstep was a Tuesday. I had just finished a long workday and was looking forward to a quiet night with takeout and the latest episode of my favorite show. When I opened the door to find Amber surrounded by 4 massive suitcases, 2 duffel bags, and several shopping bags, I initially thought she was dropping off items for storage. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing to the mountain of luggage. Amber's smile didn't reach her eyes as she replied, "My stuff, obviously. I'm moving in." I felt like I'd been doused with ice water. "What are you talking about? You can't just move in here." "Why not? You have that extra bedroom you barely use." She was already pushing past me into the apartment, dragging a suitcase behind her. "That's my home office, Amber. I work from there." I stood my ground, blocking the entry. "And this is my apartment. You can't just decide to move in without discussing it with me first." Amber's friendly facade dropped instantly. "God, Jessica, why are you always so selfish?" "I lost my apartment." "Where am I supposed to go?" "You lost your apartment? How? When?" This was the first I'd heard of it. "Last week," she said dismissively. "The landlord was a total jerk about the rent being late. It's not my fault the boutique closed and my last paycheck was short." I tried to process this information. "But why didn't you call me? We could have talked about options, maybe." "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this." Amber's voice rose. "You've always been so uptight about your precious space and your precious things. Meanwhile, I'm literally homeless." "You're not homeless, Amber. What about staying with parents?" Amber rolled her eyes. "They're dealing with Dad's recovery. Mom specifically suggested I come here since you have the extra room." My stomach dropped. "Mom told you to come here? Without asking me first? Why don't you call her yourself if you don't believe me?" Amber pulled out her phone, dialed, and thrust it at me with a triumphant look. My mother answered on the second ring. "Hi, honey. Did Jessica let you in?" The conversation that followed left me feeling betrayed and cornered. My mother spoke as if this arrangement had already been decided, expressing disappointment in my reluctance. "It's only temporary, Jessica," she insisted. "Your sister needs help right now. What kind of person refuses to help family when they have the means?" I tried explaining that my home office was essential for my work, that I valued my privacy, that this was my space that I paid for. But each argument was met with subtle guilt-tripping and accusations of selfishness. By the time the call ended, I felt manipulated into a corner. While I was on the phone, Amber had already moved further into my apartment, pulling her luggage behind her. She headed straight for the second bedroom, my carefully organized office where I spent hours working on projects that had earned my recent promotion. "Amber, wait, we need to discuss this," I hurried after her, but it was too late. She was already surveying the room, eyeing my desk and bookshelves. "This shouldn't take long to clear out," she remarked casually. "You can put your desk in the corner of your bedroom, right? Or maybe the living room?" I stood there, speechless at her audacity. "You can't just move my things. This is my workspace, my livelihood." Amber sighed dramatically. Don't be so dramatic. You work at an office. This is just your little side project space. Those little side projects helped me earn my promotion, I countered, feeling my blood pressure rise. And I frequently work from home. Where am I supposed to take client calls with you here? You'll figure it out, Amber said dismissively, already opening my closet to check the available space. You're the organized one, remember? That first evening was excruciating. Amber commandeered my space without regard for my feelings or needs. When I tried to establish some ground rules, quiet hours during my work calls, shared cleaning responsibilities, grocery expenses, she nodded absently while scrolling through her phone, clearly not listening. Around 8 p.m., she casually ordered $75 worth of sushi delivery without consulting me, then looked surprised when I declined to split the bill. But I got rolls for both of us, she argued, despite ordering only varieties she knew I disliked. By the time I retreated to my bedroom that night, my office was already transformed into Amber's chaotic living space. Clothes were strewn across my desk chair, makeup products cluttered the surface where my computer usually sat, and my carefully organized files had been stacked haphazardly in a corner to make room for Amber's things. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own home. How had I lost control so quickly? And how long would temporary turn out to be? Every scenario I imagined filled me with dread, and by morning, I was exhausted, anxious, and increasingly resentful of both Amber and my parents for putting me in this impossible position. A week into Amber's unwelcome residency, the impact on my professional life became painfully apparent. I had managed to relocate my workspace to a small corner of my bedroom, cramming my desk against the window and using my bed as an impromptu filing cabinet. It wasn't ideal, but I was determined not to let Amber's presence affect my performance at work. That Thursday, I had a crucial Zoom meeting scheduled with a potential new client, a local restaurant chain looking to revamp their digital marketing strategy. This account could potentially add significant revenue to our agency and would be my first major client acquisition since my promotion. I had prepared extensively, creating a comprehensive presentation that I believed would win them over. 10 minutes before the meeting, I closed my bedroom door, put on my professional blazer, and set up my laptop with a neutral background. I had specifically asked Amber to keep noise to a minimum during this hour-long meeting, a request she acknowledged with a distracted "yeah, sure" while watching videos on her phone. Just as the meeting reached a critical point, me explaining our proposed social media strategy, my bedroom door flew open. Amber walked in wearing just a towel, her hair dripping wet. "Jess, where's your good conditioner? The purple bottle?" she asked loudly, seemingly oblivious to my wide-eyed horror and frantic hand gestures to leave. On my screen, I could see the confused and uncomfortable expressions of the restaurant's marketing director and owner. I quickly apologized and tried to mute my microphone, but not before Amber continued, "Also, you're out of clean towels. I used your good one. And someone named Melissa called about some presentation? I told her you were busy." My heart sank. Melissa was my boss, likely calling about this very meeting. The restaurant owner cleared his throat awkwardly as Amber finally registered my murderous glare and retreated, leaving the door wide open. The remainder of the meeting was stilted and uncomfortable, with my professional image clearly damaged. Afterward, I received a private message from my boss, "Everything okay at home, Jessica?" That was unprofessional. "Let's talk tomorrow." When I confronted Amber about the interruption, she seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset. "It was just a quick question," she defended. "And how was I supposed to know you were actually in an important meeting? You're always on your computer." "I specifically told you I had a client meeting at 2 p.m., I reminded her, trying to control my temper. "I asked you to keep quiet for 1 hour. Amber rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting. It's not like they've never seen someone in a towel before. Anyway, did you bring any food home? I'm starving, and there's nothing to eat." This had become another point of contention. Despite not contributing to groceries, Amber consistently consumed food I purchased for myself. I'd return home to find empty containers of my meal-prepped lunches, my snacks depleted, and even the special dark chocolate I saved for stressful days mysteriously disappearing. "Amber, we need to talk about boundaries," I said firmly, sitting down at the kitchen table. "You interrupted an important work meeting, you're using my personal items without asking, and you haven't contributed to any household expenses." "Oh my God, are you seriously nickel-and-diming your own sister?" Amber's voice took on the wounded tone I'd come to recognize as her go-to defense mechanism. "I told you I don't have money right now. What do you want me to do, starve?" "I want you to respect my space and my things," I countered. "And I want to know what your plan is. It's been a week, and I haven't seen you applying for a single job." "I'm taking a mental health break," Amber declared. "My last job was toxic, and I need to recover before jumping into something new." A good sister would understand that. The conversation devolved from there, with Amber deflecting, minimizing, and eventually accusing me of being heartless. When I pointed out that I had my own financial obligations and career to maintain, she suggested I was obsessed with work and needed to lighten up. Frustrated and feeling increasingly trapped, I called my parents that evening, hoping they might provide some support or at least a timeline for this arrangement. "Mom, this isn't working," I explained after detailing the work incident. "Amber isn't respecting my space or my need to maintain professional boundaries while working from home." My mother's response was dismissive. "Jessica, you've always been so particular about your things. Can't you be a little flexible? Amber is going through a difficult time." "I understand that, but she interrupted an important client meeting today. My boss is concerned, and this could affect my promotion." "It was just one meeting," Mom replied. "I'm sure they'll understand. Family emergencies happen." "This wasn't an emergency, Mom. She wanted my conditioner." There was a pause before Mom sighed. "Jessica, you have a stable job and a nice apartment. Amber has nothing right now. Shouldn't you be happy you're in a position to help your sister?" I tried appealing to my father, who had been quiet during the conversation. "Dad, you understand the importance of professionalism. This arrangement is affecting my ability to do my job effectively." His response was non-committal. "These things have a way of working themselves out, Jess. Just give it some time." By the time I hung up, I felt completely unsupported and increasingly resentful. This dynamic felt painfully familiar, Amber creating chaos, my parents enabling her behavior, and me expected to accommodate it all without complaint. It was a pattern established in childhood that I thought I had escaped when I moved into my own place. Now, it felt like I was right back where I started, with my needs and boundaries considered secondary to Amber's. That night, as I listened to Amber talking loudly on the phone in the next room well past midnight, I realized that this situation wouldn't resolve itself. If I wanted my life and my space back, I would need to take matters into my own hands. 2 weeks into Amber's invasion, I noticed discrepancies in her story that didn't add up. Initially, I had accepted her explanation that she'd been evicted the previous week due to financial hardship after losing her job. But small inconsistencies began to emerge that made me suspicious. First, there was her casual reference to an event from 3 months ago, when she mentioned being between apartments. When I questioned this, she quickly backtracked, claiming she meant she had been apartment hunting while still at her old place. Then, I discovered mail addressed to Amber that she had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. The envelope contained a final notice from her previous apartment complex, dated nearly 2 months earlier, not last week as she had claimed. The document referenced multiple missed payments and formally terminated her lease effective 6 weeks ago. This revelation prompted me to do something I never thought I'd do: investigate my own sister. While Amber was out meeting friends for lunch, somehow she always had money for socializing, I began searching for more evidence. In her disorganized mess of paperwork scattered across my former office, I found a bank statement showing a substantial deposit of $3,800 from Serenity Boutique Severance dated 7 weeks ago. Contrary to her story about a last paycheck being short, she had received a generous severance package. The same statement showed numerous withdrawals at high-end clothing stores, restaurants, and beauty salons in the weeks following. My suspicions growing, I checked her social media accounts. While she had been telling me and our parents that she was barely surviving, her Instagram told a different story. There were posts showing expensive brunches, a weekend getaway to a lakeside resort, and several shopping hauls featuring designer items, all timestamped during the period she claimed to be in financial crisis. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. I received a call from someone named Taylor, who introduced herself as Amber's former roommate. "I found your number in Amber's emergency contact information," Taylor explained. "I've been trying to reach her about her remaining belongings and the damage to the apartment." "Damage? What damage?" I asked, confused. "The water damage from the overflowing bathtub. Amber left the water running and went out shopping. By the time I got home, the bathroom, hallway, and part of my bedroom were flooded." Taylor sounded justifiably upset. "She promised to pay for her portion of the repairs, but then she just disappeared 3 months ago. The landlord kept our security deposit, but it wasn't enough to cover everything." This conversation revealed the truth. Amber hadn't been suddenly evicted due to financial hardship after losing her job. She had caused significant damage to a shared apartment, abandoned her responsibility, and deliberately avoided the consequences. Most disturbing was Taylor's casual mention that Amber had been talking about moving in with her sister for weeks before the incident, suggesting this had been her plan all along, not a recent emergency solution as she'd presented it. Armed with this evidence, I confronted Amber when she returned home that evening. I laid out the documents, screenshots, and notes from my conversation with Taylor on the kitchen table. "You want to explain this?" I asked calmly as she walked in the door. Amber's expression shifted from surprise to defensiveness to calculation in seconds. "You went through my things," she deflected, trying to position herself as the victim. "I found evidence that you've been lying about your situation," I replied, refusing to be sidetracked. "You weren't evicted last week. You abandoned your apartment months ago after causing significant damage. You received severance pay that you spent on luxury items instead of housing. And you planned to move in here well before you showed up at my door claiming emergency." Amber's facade cracked. Her eyes welled with tears, a tactical response I'd seen countless times. "Okay, fine. It wasn't exactly like I said. But I was still in trouble, Jess. I made some mistakes." "Mistakes? You deliberately lied to me and to Mom and Dad to manipulate us." "Because I knew you wouldn't help me if I told the truth," she cried, her voice rising dramatically. "You've always had everything so together, so perfect. You don't know what it's like to struggle." I remained calm, which seemed to frustrate her further. "I struggle too, Amber. The difference is I take responsibility for my actions." The confrontation escalated as Amber cycled through her emotional manipulation tactics. First came the tears and victim positioning. "I'm doing the best I can. Not everyone can be perfect like you." When that didn't work, she moved to threats. "Fine, I'll just leave right now. I'll be homeless, and it'll be your fault. Is that what you want? I've been feeling so depressed lately, I don't know what I might do if I have nowhere to go." Finally, she turned to shared history. "Remember when we were kids and I stood up for you against those girls who were bullying you? I've always been there for you, and this is how you repay me?" It was exhausting, but I held firm. "I'm not asking you to leave immediately. But I am asking for honesty and a concrete plan. You need to find a job and your own place within a reasonable timeframe." After nearly 2 hours of emotional manipulation, deflection, and negotiation, Amber finally broke down in what appeared to be genuine tears. "I'm scared, Jess," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to get my life together. Everything I touch falls apart." Despite my anger, I felt a flicker of compassion. This was still my sister. "I'll give you 1 more week to show me you're making real efforts. Apply for jobs every day. Create a budget. Start looking for affordable housing options." Amber nodded eagerly, promising change and immediate action. You'll see, Jess. I'll start tomorrow. I'll apply for at least 5 jobs a day. I wanted to believe her, but experience had taught me caution. I'm going to hold you to that, Amber. That night, I called my parents to share what I'd discovered, hoping the evidence would finally open their eyes to Amber's manipulation. I was sorely disappointed. Everyone makes mistakes, Jessica, my mother said after I'd explained everything. Amber's going through a phase. She needs support, not judgment. This isn't a phase, Mom. This is a pattern of deception and irresponsibility that you and Dad keep enabling. How can you be so cruel? Mom's voice hardened. She's your sister. If you kick her out, where will she go? I'm not kicking her out immediately. I'm asking her to take responsibility and make a plan. Well, I think you're being unnecessarily harsh. She made some poor decisions, but her heart is in the right place. I hung up feeling frustrated and invalidated. It was clear that my parents, particularly my mother, were deeply entrenched in their enabling patterns. If I wanted this situation resolved, I would need irrefutable evidence and a more strategic approach. The tentative truce with Amber lasted precisely 3 days before a more serious violation occurred. I was preparing for work one morning when I received a notification from my banking app. An $879 charge at Nordstrom had just been processed on my credit card. I hadn't made any such purchase. A quick check of my wallet confirmed my suspicion. My credit card was missing from its usual slot. With a growing sense of dread, I opened my banking app to find several other recent charges I hadn't made: $150 at a beauty salon, $215 at a wine bar, and $327 at an electronics store. Amber was still asleep when I burst into her room, my former office, and found shopping bags from Nordstrom partially hidden in the closet. The merchandise tags were still attached to a designer handbag and clothes in Amber's size. What the hell, Amber? I shouted, shaking her awake. You stole my credit card? She startled awake, confusion turning to guilt as she registered the credit card statement in my hand and the shopping bags I'd discovered. I was going to tell you, she mumbled, sitting up. I needed professional clothes for job interviews. I was going to pay you back as soon as I got hired. That's theft, Amber. That's a crime. My hands were shaking with anger. You stole from me after I gave you a place to stay. Don't be so dramatic, she countered, fully awake now and shifting to defense mode. Sisters borrow things all the time. This isn't borrowing. You took my credit card without permission and charged over $1,500. Our argument escalated until Amber finally admitted she had no immediate way to repay me. But I have prospects, she insisted. I've had several promising interviews. This claim seemed suspicious given that she rarely left the apartment except to meet friends. Show me the job applications you've submitted, I demanded. You said you were applying to 5 places every day. After much resistance, Amber finally pulled out her laptop and reluctantly showed me her email. There were indeed responses from several companies, but not application confirmations. They were job offer letters dating back several weeks that she had apparently ignored or declined. You've been receiving actual job offers and not taking them? I was incredulous. Amber looked away. Those weren't right for me. The pay was too low, or the hours were inconvenient, or the workplace seemed toxic. You're not in a position to be this selective. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You have no income, you're living on my couch, and you just committed credit card fraud against your own sister. The confrontation took an even more disturbing turn when I discovered a letter addressed to Amber from a credit card company I didn't recognize, congratulating her on her new account. The address listed was my apartment. Are you using my address for credit applications? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Amber's silence was confirmation enough. Do you understand this as identity theft? This could affect my credit score, my ability to rent in the future, even my job prospects if they do financial background checks. It's not identity theft, Amber protested weakly. I used my own name, just your address. Because you have no address of your own due to your irresponsibility. And now you're potentially damaging my financial reputation too. The situation deteriorated further that weekend when I returned home early from a grocery run to find 3 people I didn't know in my living room, drinking my wine and eating my food. Amber had invited friends over without asking and given them free rein of my apartment. What is this? I demanded as I walked in on their impromptu gathering. Just having a few friends over, Amber said casually. You remember Zach, right? And this is Lindsay and Megan. I had never met any of these people. Amber, you can't just invite strangers into my home without asking. They're not strangers, they're my friends, she corrected, as if this technicality made it acceptable. I asked her friends to leave, causing an uncomfortable scene that Amber later blamed me for. You embarrassed me in front of my friends, she complained. They think you're a total control freak now. I don't care what they think. This is my apartment, not a free hotel for you and your friends. The final straw came 2 days later. I returned from work to find my apartment in disarray, empty bottles, food containers, and cigarette butts. Smoking was strictly prohibited in my lease, littered the living room. The distinct smell of marijuana hung in the air, another lease violation that could get me evicted. Worst of all, on the coffee table lay shattered pieces of a hand-blown glass paperweight, a cherished gift from my grandmother before she passed away. It had been a prized possession, one of the few items I had to remember her by. Amber was in the bathroom when I discovered the damage. When confronted, she offered a dismissive apology. It was an accident. Things break, Jess. It's not like it was valuable. It was valuable to me. I shouted, my composure finally breaking. It was from Grandma, and it was irreplaceable. God, you're so materialistic, Amber sighed. It's just a paperweight. I said I was sorry. In that moment, I had a startling realization. Amber didn't just lack respect for my boundaries, she fundamentally saw me as an extension of herself, a resource to be used rather than a person with my own needs and feelings. In her mind, my apartment, my possessions, even my credit were rightfully hers to access because I was family and I was doing well. This wasn't going to stop until I took decisive action. That night, I researched tenant rights extensively, discovering that even though Amber had been staying with me for weeks, she likely did not have established tenancy rights under state law since she had never paid rent or utilities and had no written agreement. I also reached out to my close friend Mia, who had witnessed similar dynamics with her own brother. You're not crazy, she assured me after hearing the full story. This is classic entitled behavior, and your parents are enabling it. You need to protect yourself. Mia's validation was the final push I needed. I made a decision. I would give Amber a formal deadline to leave, with clear consequences if she refused. I would involve our parents in a more structured way, presenting all the evidence I had gathered. And most importantly, I would stand firm regardless of the emotional manipulation that would inevitably follow. As I prepared for bed that night, mentally rehearsing what I would say to my family, I felt a mix of dread and determination. This wouldn't be easy, but I couldn't continue living as a hostage in my own home. I arranged a family meeting at my parents' house the following Sunday, insisting that it was important we all talk in person. I arrived early, armed with a folder containing all the evidence I had collected, the eviction notice showing Amber had lied about the timeline, bank statements showing her severance payment and frivolous spending, screenshots of her social media posts contradicting her claims of financial hardship, a statement showing the unauthorized charges on my credit card, and photos of the damage to my apartment. My parents seemed concerned by my serious demeanor as we sat around their dining room table. Amber arrived 20 minutes late, already defensive as if she sensed what was coming. I've asked for this meeting because we need to address Amber's living situation, I began calmly. It's not working, and it's affecting my mental health and my career. Jessica, we've already discussed this, my mother interrupted. It's temporary until Amber gets back on her feet. That's exactly what we need to talk about, I continued, opening my folder. Amber hasn't been honest about her situation, and I don't see any evidence that she's trying to get back on her feet. I laid out the timeline methodically, presenting each piece of evidence as I explained the true sequence of events. Amber wasn't suddenly evicted last week due to losing her job. She abandoned her apartment nearly 3 months ago after causing significant water damage. She received almost $4,000 in severance pay, which she spent on luxury items instead of housing or bills. My parents looked stunned as they reviewed the documents. Amber's face flushed with anger. Furthermore, I continued, since moving into my apartment, Amber has stolen my credit card and charged over $1,500 without permission. She's using my address for new credit applications, potentially damaging my credit score. She's invited strangers into my home without asking, violated my lease with smoking and unauthorized guests, and broken a precious keepsake from Grandma without showing genuine remorse. My mother's initial reaction was disbelief. There must be some misunderstanding. Amber wouldn't do these things. The evidence is right in front of you, Mom, I replied, pointing to the credit card statement with charges circled in red. These aren't misunderstandings. These are deliberate choices. My father, who had been quietly examining the documents, looked up with concern. Amber, is this true? Did you charge items on Jessica's credit card without asking? Amber's strategy shifted immediately to minimization. I borrowed it for a few necessities. I was going to pay her back. Jessica is blowing everything out of proportion because she's always been jealous of me. Necessities? I countered, pulling out photos of the designer purse and clothes I'd found. And how exactly were you planning to pay me back with no job and no savings? As the confrontation intensified, I explained how Amber's presence was affecting my work. I almost lost a major client because of her interrupting an important meeting. My boss has expressed concerns about my professionalism. I'm at risk of losing the promotion I worked so hard for. It sounds like you care more about your job than your sister, my mother remarked coldly. I care about both, I replied. But my job is what allows me to support myself and pay for the apartment that Amber is currently living in for free. If I lose my job, we'll both be homeless. My father, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke up. Jessica has a point, Laura. This doesn't look good. He turned to Amber. Why did you turn down these job offers? Some of these positions look perfectly reasonable. Amber's eyes welled with tears, her reliable defense mechanism. None of them were right for me. I deserve a job that values my talents and pays what I'm worth. What you deserve and what you need right now are different things, Dad replied, surprising me with his directness. Everyone starts somewhere. My mother, however, remained resistant. Jessica, I understand you're frustrated, but family sticks together during hard times. Amber just needs a little more support right now. I've been supporting her for nearly a month, I responded. I've given her a place to stay, food to eat, and countless chances to show me she's making an effort to improve her situation. Instead, she's taken advantage of my generosity at every turn. I took a deep breath and delivered my ultimatum. I'm giving Amber 2 weeks to find another living arrangement. After that, I'll be forced to take formal steps to remove her from my apartment. You would evict your own sister? My mother was aghast. If necessary, yes. I've already consulted with an attorney about my options. This wasn't entirely true, I had only researched online, but I needed them to understand my seriousness. This is exactly why I didn't tell Jessica the truth from the beginning, Amber interjected, her voice quivering dramatically. She's always been cold and unforgiving. She's never understood what it's like to struggle like I do. Struggle? I couldn't contain my frustration. Amber, you've received more financial support from Mom and Dad than I ever have. You've had multiple chances at stable jobs that you've thrown away. Your struggles are largely consequences of your own choices. The conversation devolved into a heated argument about family obligations, personal responsibility, and our shared history. My mother continued to defend Amber, suggesting that my boundary setting was equivalent to abandonment. My father, while more understanding of my position, seemed reluctant to take a definitive stand against either his wife or his daughter. The most painful moment came when my mother said, "If you do this, Jessica, don't expect us to be there when you need help someday." The implication was clear: supporting Amber unconditionally was the price of remaining in the family's good graces. It was a manipulation tactic I'd seen many times before, but never so explicitly stated. "I hope that's not true, Mom," I replied quietly. "Because I'd like to think family support doesn't require me to sacrifice my financial stability, career, and mental health." After nearly 3 hours of circular arguments, my father finally intervened with unexpected clarity. "Enough, Laura. Jessica has legitimate concerns, and Amber has not been honest with us. We need to find a solution that doesn't put all the burden on Jessica." My mother's face registered shock at this departure from their usual united front. "So you're taking her side now?" "I'm not taking sides," Dad replied firmly. "I'm looking at the evidence and recognizing that our current approach isn't working, for any of us." As we left my parents' house, nothing was truly resolved. My mother barely spoke to me. Amber oscillated between tearful pleas and cold anger, and my father seemed torn between his recognition of the problem and his reluctance to upset the family dynamic. I drove home alone, emotionally exhausted but also strangely empowered. For perhaps the first time, I had refused to be manipulated into setting aside my own well-being for Amber's benefit. I had spoken my truth and stood my ground, even in the face of my mother's disapproval. But as the emotional high of the confrontation faded, doubt and guilt began to creep in. Had I been too harsh? Would this permanently damage my relationship with my family? Was I really prepared to follow through on my ultimatum if Amber refused to leave? I spent that evening alone in my apartment. Amber had chosen to stay at our parents' house after the meeting, alternating between conviction that I had done the right thing and waves of guilt about potentially fracturing my family. It was during this solitary reflection that I received a text from my father that would shift the entire dynamic. "We need to talk. Just you and me. Tomorrow lunch?" The day after our family confrontation, I met my father at a quiet cafe halfway between my apartment and my parents' house. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "I did some thinking after yesterday," he began after we ordered. "And I owe you an apology, Jessica." His words caught me off guard. In our family, apologies were rare commodities. "For what?" I asked cautiously. "For not seeing what was happening. For letting this situation get so out of hand." He rubbed his forehead wearily. "Your mother and we haven't been helping Amber by constantly rescuing her. We've been preventing her from growing up." This admission was unprecedented. My father had always followed my mother's lead when it came to Amber, offering financial support without question and avoiding conflict at all costs. "What changed your mind?" I asked. "After you left, I found more evidence that Amber has been lying to us. There were job offer letters in her email that she never mentioned. And I discovered she's been using your mother's credit card too, without permission." He looked genuinely troubled. When I confronted her, she showed no remorse. She actually said she was entitled to it because we're family. This revelation didn't surprise me, but my father's reaction to it did. For the first time, he seemed to be seeing the pattern clearly. "I want to help you resolve this situation," he continued. "I've talked to your mother, and while she's not completely on board, she's agreed not to interfere." We spent the next hour developing a strategic plan. Dad would help Amber find a small studio apartment that he would co-sign for, but with strict conditions. She would need to accept one of her pending job offers, agree to financial counseling, and maintain employment for at least 6 months. He would pay the security deposit but not ongoing rent. That would be Amber's responsibility once she started working. In the meantime, he added, "I'd like to help you secure your apartment and your finances." With my father's support, I implemented a comprehensive protection plan over the next few days. First, I consulted with an attorney who specialized in tenant law. While Amber technically wasn't on my lease, the lawyer advised documenting everything and proceeding with formal written notice rather than risking a claim of illegal eviction. He helped me draft a formal letter giving Amber 2 weeks' notice to vacate, which I had my friend Mia witness me delivering to Amber. Next, I took steps to protect my finances and identity. I reported my credit card as stolen and requested a replacement with a new number. I set up fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus and froze my credit to prevent any new accounts from being opened in my name. I also initiated credit monitoring to catch any suspicious activity early. To protect my physical space, I installed a simple security camera in the common areas of my apartment, completely legal and within my rights as the leaseholder. I changed the password on my Wi-Fi and secured my important documents and valuables in a locked filing cabinet in my bedroom. I also had a serious conversation with my boss, Melissa, explaining the family situation that had affected my work performance. To my relief, she was understanding and supportive, even offering flexible work arrangements until the situation was resolved. Throughout this process, I built a stronger support network outside my family. Friends like Mia offered emotional support and perspective, reminding me that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary for my well-being and, ultimately, for Amber's growth too. Beyond securing my own position, I researched resources that might actually help Amber. I found information about job placement services, financial literacy workshops, and even counseling options that addressed the underlying issues behind her chronic irresponsibility. I compiled these into a resource guide that I planned to give her along with the formal notice to vacate. When Amber returned to my apartment 3 days after our family meeting, her attitude had shifted noticeably. Gone was the entitled confidence, replaced by a sullen defensiveness. She had clearly expected me to back down after the emotional family confrontation, and my continued resolve had caught her off guard. I presented her with the formal notice, explaining calmly that this wasn't personal but necessary. "Dad and I have worked out a plan to help you transition to your own place," I explained. "He's willing to co-sign for a studio apartment if you accept one of your job offers and agree to financial counseling." Amber's reaction was predictably volatile, cycling through disbelief, anger, accusations, and finally tearful pleas. "You can't just throw me out on the street." "I'm not," I replied steadily. "I'm giving you 2 weeks' notice and a path to stable housing with Dad's help. That's more consideration than you showed your previous roommate when you abandoned her with water damage." When emotional manipulation failed to sway me, Amber attempted to circumvent my boundaries in increasingly desperate ways. She accidentally damaged my laptop while cleaning, a transparent attempt to hinder my work. She invited friends over despite my explicit prohibition, leading to a tense confrontation where I had to physically block them from entering. Most disturbingly, she attempted to intercept my new credit card when it arrived in the mail. The security camera I had installed captured her opening my mail and examining the card before hastily returning it to the envelope when she heard me coming home. Each violation strengthened my resolve and validated my decision. This wasn't just about reclaiming my space, it was about breaking a dysfunctional pattern that had persisted throughout our lives. Implementing these boundaries was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done. Every time Amber cried or my mother called to express disappointment, I felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation. It would have been easier to give in, to let Amber stay just a little longer, to continue the cycle of enabling that had defined our family dynamic for decades. But I held firm, reminding myself that true compassion sometimes meant allowing natural consequences to occur. By protecting my boundaries, I was not only preserving my own well-being but also creating the opportunity for Amber to finally face reality and possibly grow from it. As the 2-week deadline approached, I prepared for every scenario, including the possibility that Amber would refuse to leave voluntarily. I had the eviction paperwork ready if needed, though I desperately hoped it wouldn't come to that. The prospect of legally removing my own sister from my home filled me with dread, but I remained committed to following through if necessary. What I didn't anticipate was my father's increasing involvement and the unexpected shift it would create in our family's long-established patterns. 3 days before Amber's deadline to vacate my apartment, I received an unexpected visitor. My father stood at my door, alone, with an expression of determined resolve I hadn't seen in years. "Can we talk?" he asked simply. Over coffee at my kitchen table, Dad shared a revelation that shed new light on our family dynamics. I've enabled Amber's behavior for years, he admitted. But it started long before that. Your mother and we've never treated you two equally, and that's on me as much as her. He explained that when we were children, he had often recognized the disparity in how my parents responded to Amber's demands versus my independence, but he had chosen the path of least resistance, supporting Mom's decisions to avoid conflict, even when he disagreed. Amber was always more demanding, more emotional, he explained. Your mother worried about her constantly, while you seemed so capable on your own. We fell into a pattern of giving Amber more attention, more allowances, because she seemed to need it. But that wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't good for her. This acknowledgement of the family pattern I had felt but never heard confirmed was profoundly validating. For years, I had questioned my own perceptions, wondering if I was overly sensitive or selfish for resenting the different standards applied to Amber and me. I'm here to help fix this situation properly, Dad continued. Not just temporarily, but for good. I found Amber a studio apartment and paid the first month's rent and security deposit. I've also arranged for her to start a job at my friend Robert's accounting firm next Monday, entry level, but with good potential if she applies herself. I was surprised by his proactive approach. What does Mom think about all this? Dad sighed. She's not happy with me right now. She still thinks we should let Amber stay with you until she finds her footing. But I've made it clear this isn't negotiable. It's time for real change. Later that afternoon, Dad returned with Amber. Her expression was a mix of resentment and resignation as Dad firmly explained the plan. You're moving into the studio apartment this weekend, he told her, his tone leaving no room for argument. You'll start work on Monday. You'll attend financial counseling sessions weekly, and you'll check in with me regularly to show you're paying your bills on time. When Amber began to protest, Dad cut her off. Something I had rarely seen him do. This isn't a negotiation, Amber. This is the help we're offering. You can accept it with these conditions, or you can figure out your own solution, but you cannot stay here past Saturday. The shock on Amber's face mirrored my own. This was a dramatic departure from the father who had always deferred to Mom's judgment and avoided confrontation at all costs. But Jessica has so much more space than she needs, Amber tried, using her usual tactics. It's not fair that. Life isn't fair, Dad interrupted. Jessica worked for what she has. She pays her rent on time. She manages her finances responsibly. She's earned her independence and her privacy. Amber turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. You did this. You turned Dad against me. No, Amber, Dad said firmly. Your choices did this. Jessica simply stopped covering for them. Over the next few days, Amber packed her belongings under Dad's supervision. She oscillated between tearful apologies, passive-aggressive comments, and occasional moments of what seemed like genuine reflection. I maintained a polite distance, helping when asked but avoiding getting drawn into emotional manipulation. The day before the move, Mom showed up unannounced, making one last attempt to reverse course. This is so unnecessary, she insisted. Amber's your sister. Can't you find it in your heart to give her more time? I held firm. This isn't about my heart, Mom. It's about setting healthy boundaries. Dad has found her an apartment and a job. She has a path forward that doesn't involve taking advantage of me. Mom's expression hardened. You've always been so cold, Jessica. So self-centered. The accusation stung, but I recognized it for what it was, a last-ditch attempt to maintain the family dynamic that had been comfortable for her, if harmful to Amber and unfair to me. I love you, Mom, I replied calmly. And I love Amber. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them take advantage of you or enabling behavior that hurts them in the long run. She left shortly after, disapproving but unable to change the course of events that Dad and I had set in motion. On Saturday morning, Dad arrived with a small moving truck. The process of loading Amber's many possessions was tense but orderly. As they prepared to leave, Amber paused at my door. I'm sorry about Grandma's paperweight, she said quietly. It wasn't a comprehensive apology for everything, but it seemed genuine, perhaps the beginning of greater self-awareness. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, choosing not to push for more in that moment. After they drove away, I stood in my apartment, my space, truly mine again, and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief was primary, but there was also sadness for the fractured state of my family, guilt that lingered despite my certainty that I had done the right thing, and apprehension about the path forward. The apartment felt eerily quiet after weeks of Amber's constant presence. I spent the weekend deep cleaning, rearranging furniture, and restoring my home office to its former state. Each act of reclamation helped settle my nerves and rebuild my sense of security in my own space. In the weeks that followed, our family entered a period of adjustment and cautious healing. Dad reported that Amber was actually showing up to work consistently and had kept her apartment in reasonable condition. The financial counseling seemed to be making an impact, with Amber creating her first ever budget and sticking to it, at least in these early stages. Mom remained distant at first, but as she observed Amber's gradual progress toward independence, her resistance began to soften. During a family dinner a month after the move, she actually acknowledged that the tough love approach seemed to be working better than their previous enabling. As for me, I worked with the property management company to take over my lease directly, removing my parents as the landlords. This created a cleaner separation between my housing and my family relationships, a boundary I now recognized as essential. I also began seeing a therapist to address the patterns I had internalized growing up in a family where one child's needs consistently overshadowed the others. These sessions helped me understand that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary for healthy relationships and personal well-being. My relationship with Amber remained complicated. There were setbacks, days when she would call asking for money or trying to revert to old patterns. But there was also growth, with occasional moments of genuine connection untainted by manipulation or resentment. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, I sat on my balcony enjoying the morning sunshine and reflecting on how far we had all come. My apartment was once again my sanctuary. My promotion at work had been confirmed, with my boss specifically commending my improved focus and creativity. Most importantly, I had found my voice and the courage to use it, even when doing so disrupted comfortable but unhealthy family patterns. The journey wasn't over. Family dynamics built over decades don't transform overnight. Mom still occasionally slipped into enabling behaviors, Amber still struggled with accountability, and I still battled guilt when prioritizing my needs. But the foundation had shifted. We were, slowly and imperfectly, creating a new pattern based on respect, responsibility, and genuine support rather than enabling and inequality. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the nature of family love, how it can be both beautiful and complicated, how it can hurt even while healing, and how sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stand firm in our truth, even when it's difficult. I had learned that supporting someone doesn't always mean giving them what they want, and that true compassion sometimes requires the courage to say no. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members who took advantage of your kindness? What strategies helped you stay strong when faced with guilt trips or emotional manipulation? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Remember, setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish, it's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone involved. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own family relationships.